Welcome back to Markets and Leaders, where we're not here to chase headlines. We're decoding what is actually moving beneath them. And right now, energy is not just part of that story, it is the story. Every spike in oil, every pullback, every escalation, every pause, the market is reacting in real time to one thing: uncertainty around energy security. And what we are watching unfold globally is not isolated. The conflict in the Middle East is not just geopolitical tension, it's a live stress test on the entire energy system. Because every time instability enters the equation, the same question comes back into focus: where does reliable energy actually come from when everything else becomes unpredictable? And this is where the conversation is quietly shifting. I'm Lyndsay Malchuk, your host, right here on Markets and Leaders. While oil reacts immediately, nuclear moves differently, slower on the surface, but far more structural underneath. It doesn't spike on headlines, it builds through necessity. And what is happening right now is forcing that necessity back into the spotlight. Now, this is not as an alternative, as a requirement. Now, this because the world is trying to balance two things at the same time: decarbonization and exponentially rising demand, and that balance is getting harder to hold. So, the real question is not whether nuclear has a role, it is how big that role becomes as pressure continues to build across the system. And more importantly, what happens underneath the surface for nuclear to scale in a way that matches what is coming. We're sitting down today with someone who is building directly into that layer system itself. Conor Lynch with American Atomics. Conor, welcome to Markets and Leaders. This is a very interesting time right now. I mean, just when you thought you understand it, something pivots in the second.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. It is an interesting time, and I think an important reminder for everyone, observers, the people watching today, that while AI gets the headlines, energy has always and will always be the backbone of the global economy. If you look at the history of the world economy, it's a history of energy. The transition from animal labor and burning wood to burning coal to burning oil to ultimately renewables and nuclear. And if you look at the disruption that's happening right now in the Strait of Hormuz, it's a stark reminder that the flow of energy around our economy dictates how it works, where it works, and most importantly, if it works at all. So right now we're entering that sort of stress test moment for the global economy. The strait is supposedly opening now. There's conflicting reports on that, at least for the ceasefire period. I don't think most ships that have been stuck in the Gulf have started transiting yet. But even if they do start in the next days or in the next weeks, the damage is in some respects already done. We're not going to have a return to normal when that happens.
Well, that's one of the things you and I just spoke about before we went on camera here was the recovery of that. It's not just going to be overnight. We're talking about years for it to recover to pre-conflict levels to get through the strait.
Yeah, there's two reasons for that. One, oil doesn't come out of the strait and then instantly teleport to end users in Asia, in Europe, in North America. The transport of this stuff is in giant tanker ships, the size in some cases of multiple football fields, that are very heavy and very slow. And so the shipments from before the war started are actually still arriving in North America and will continue to arrive until about April 15th. So the actual disruption for many parts of the world has either only just started hitting in terms of actual supply not arriving, or will start in the next few days. Then beyond that, the strait itself is not actually open yet. The Iranians have said as part of the ceasefire that they're going to open it, but that has not yet happened. And then even if they do open it today, and even if there was no damage to the actual production, which we know that there was, it's going to take weeks for those shipments to actually get to their ultimate end user. But then we know that there has been significant damage to production facilities all across the Gulf, in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in Iran itself, in Saudi, in UAE. It's significant damage in some cases. From the start of the war, oil is a little bit more easy to move, a little bit more fungible. You don't need giant compressors to put it into a barrel. It can be transported at room temperature. So quite a bit of that has been transported out through other routes. So, for example, the Saudis have a pipeline that runs from the oil region in northern Saudi Arabia across the desert to the Red Sea. About 68 million barrels can exit out that way. But for natural gas, especially, there are infrastructure choke points that if you break these things, they take a long time to fix, especially the cryogenics and the compressors that take natural gas, which is a gas. It's in a gaseous phase, and compress it into a liquid that you can actually transport in LNG ships. So those things cost, the full facilities cost billions, and the key cryogenic units, the lead time to replace those when they get destroyed is something like 3 to 5 years. So something in the neighborhood, the current estimation is 20% of Qatar's compressors as part of their production from the South Pars field, which they have about half of, the Iranians have about half of, were destroyed. And so that's 3 to 5 years before that production can be brought back online. It's something like $20 billion a year of lost revenue for Qatar. But it's also something in the neighborhood of, I believe, 4 or 5% of global LNG is just off the market for the next 3 to 5 years. So even if you completely open the strait today and there's no further disruption, and you absorb the next couple weeks where shipments are not arriving because they didn't depart 4 weeks ago or 5 weeks ago when they were supposed to, you're still going to have a period of about a year where the analysis I've seen is something like 1.5 to 2 million barrels of oil per day equivalent of lost production that just will not be part of the market. It's sort of 1 to 1.5% of global energy supply that'll be gone for about a year, even with the strait completely open. And then you have probably another 2 to 4 years where you're going to lose another 500,000 barrels a day, mostly from the natural gas production that won't be there. So you have this extended period where for years and years, force majeure is being declared with customers in Europe and in Asia especially. End users are not going to get their product across oil, across gas, across fertilizer inputs, petrochemicals. A lot of this stuff is disrupted for an extended period of time because missiles have actually blown things up. Drones have blown things up. Some of those things are very expensive. Some of those things are time consuming to replace. And it's not as easy as just switching the strait open again.
So right now, because of all that, markets are reacting to every perception tied to the Middle East. And you can see it instantly through what we talked about, the energy volatility. Oil moves first, but underneath that, there is a longer term repositioning happening. So from your perspective, Conor, how much of what we're seeing right now is short-term reaction versus a signal that the global energy system is being forced to rethink its foundation?
Yeah, think of it this way. If you are an LNG consumer in Japan or Taiwan, and you've just realized that if the Iranians ever get mad and fire enough missiles at Qatar, there's like 17 machines in Qatar where if you destroy those 17 machines, all of Qatari natural gas exports, which is like 20% of the world's, is offline for 3 to 5 years, which basically puts us into an energy depression. So if you are the Koreans or the Japanese or the Taiwanese or the Chinese, and you're relying on those shipments of LNG, shipments of oil from the Gulf, other petrochemicals, you are looking for alternative solutions. And if you're the Japanese, they have something like 40 reactors. I think less than half of them are currently active. You're going to rush to get those back online. If you are the Koreans or the Taiwanese, you're going to start looking strongly at building new reactors. The Chinese are already building a ton of reactors, and my anticipation is that they're going to break ground on even more because the reality is uranium doesn't have those same choke points. You can mine uranium from any number of jurisdictions around the world. The milling and processing is not done in sensitive choke points like the Persian Gulf, where Iranian missiles are able to quickly destroy a facility. And if you look at what goes into a uranium milling facility, you can build a hard rock uranium mill in the United States, for example, for about $100 million. And the lead time for most of those components is not terribly long. So even in the event of a war that actually did destroy production of yellow cake, you can rebuild it faster and cheaper. So from a supply line perspective, nuclear is starting to look a lot more credible.
It is, for sure. Because this doesn't seem like a clean transition anymore, it feels like, I don't know, pressure building from multiple directions at once, I'd say. Demand is accelerating through the AI that we talked about, the electrification and the infrastructure, while at the same time, traditional energy sources are facing political and environmental and supply constraints. So, Connor, where does nuclear actually sit in that tension right now? Is it filling a gap, or is it becoming the only scalable solution that can handle both sides of that coin?
It's not the only scalable solution. There are other solutions, but for AI especially, it's one of a small set of potential baseload solutions you can build, and one of them is limited geographically. That's hydroelectric. If you can build large dams, that is a great source of cheap power, and anywhere you can build that, you can build data centers, and that works. But much of the world does not have big rivers with big vertical drops where you can build dams like that. So you're stuck with fossil fuels or nuclear. Fossil fuels, they have their place. I have some involvement in the oil and gas industry as well, but for especially the big tech companies, they're not going to be building large coal power plants. That's just not a thing that they're going to be doing. So nuclear is the obvious solution, and the SMRs that are being rolled out are a very obvious solution for data centers. They're not grid scale power; they can power just a data center project, which is a feature that the data center builders are increasingly looking for. One of the big focal points of social opposition to building new data centers is that it raises grid pricing for a whole community. And people who live in that community, they don't want that. They don't want their home electricity bill for heating and cooling and keeping their refrigerator and TV on to go up 50% because Google moved in next door. So for Google, if you can put an SMR into a new data center build out, and it's behind the meter, and it's its own solution that doesn't raise the meter billing for John Q. Public, that is a good solution. So it's a solution that's especially tailored for the AI build out and for that set of energy demands. And I think we're going to see quite a lot more consumption and build out of nuclear in the near future. I was just in Kansas City, where they're looking to break ground on a new massive data center build out. The CEO of TerraPower was there. They're looking to have one of their natrium reactors as part of that build out. So it's it would be one of their first few deployments. Their first, I think, is in Wyoming. They have an agreement with Meta as well to build, I think, 8 reactors, and so this would be another one of the early deployments. But it's happening. I mean, it's not a theoretical thing. It's happening in practice. These rollouts are going to occur. The tech companies are putting real money behind it because they can see that energy is the big choke point for most of these data center buildouts. It's not the chips. You can get the chips. The production on that end is scaling. They're able to get that end of compute. It's the energy part that they're struggling with, and where you're seeing the most opposition in local communities that could stop build out from happening at all.
Well, this is where your position actually then comes in, and it's not probably, it is very important, because you're not building reactors, you're building what makes them possible. The fuel,
Yeah.
the supply chain, the part of the story that most people aren't looking at yet. So when people talk about nuclear scaling, how much of that conversation is actually missing the point if the fuel infrastructure is not there to support it?
That's right. So I was at the World Nuclear Symposium in September last year, and at the symposium, they present a report, an annual report on the supply and demand dynamic across the full fuel cycle. So just to give some background education for people, It's not as simple as you mine uranium out of the ground and then you put it in a reactor. It doesn't work that way. In the same way that you produce oil and you process it at a refinery and it becomes gasoline that can go in your car, or jet fuel, or any number of end products, the same thing happens with uranium, but it's actually a longer, more complicated process. So first you mine ore out of the ground, and then at a mill you use sulfuric acid to take the uranium out, and you create uranium oxide or yellow cake, U3O8. U3O8 goes to a conversion facility where it's reacted with fluorine to create hexafluoride gas, which is a gaseous version of uranium. You take that to an enrichment plant, which these days typically is a cascade facility, which these are basically, think of them as big metal drums that spin at high speed with an electromagnetic field that helps separate the valuable isotope, which is U-235. That's the unstable or fissile isotope of uranium, from 238, which is basically a stable isotope and doesn't do anything in a reactor. And so you go through all those processes, then you have a deconversion process and a fabrication process, and then you're putting it in fuel rods, and then finally it arrives at a reactor. So that you have this entire logistics chain. And at every one of those steps, you have a supply and demand imbalance where you have much more demand than supply. On the mining side, there is much more demand for yellow cake than there is actual yellow cake supply in the world. That's a global problem. On the conversion side, there is much more demand in the world than there is supply, and that's a global problem also. On the enrichment side, technically supply and demand is in balance, but if you look at the global distribution of it, the global surplus of enrichment is virtually all in Russia, and the global deficit is virtually all in the United States. And the United States is the world's largest consumer of enriched uranium because it has the world's largest reactor fleet, 94 active light water reactors. And then, when you get to these smaller reactors, the SMRs, the type of uranium that they consume is a completely different category of uranium that goes in the light water reactors. So the big light water reactors, the ones that you picture in your mind's eye when you think of a nuclear power plant, they use low enriched uranium, which is 3 to 5%, 235. Then the stuff that goes in the SMRs ranges from about 15 to 19.999%. And that's high assay, low enriched, or HALEU. And right now, other than a small amount of production from Centrus in the United States, the only commercial production of HALEU, which is needed for the entire SMR revolution, virtually all, not all, but the vast majority of SMR designs use it and cannot operate without it, including TerraPower's Natrium reactor. So the first deployment in Wyoming was at least partially delayed because they couldn't get their hands on HALEU, because 100% of global production outside of the small batch that Centrus has produced comes from Russia, which is a problem for any number of reasons.
XYZ.
Yeah.
So, okay, when you zoom out, is this becoming less about energy production and more about control over the inputs that make that production possible, you think?
That's a big part of it. It's, at the end of the day, it is about energy production. But when you go downstream and look at the choke points and where those are in the oil and gas ecosystem, we just got a profound, violent education on where those choke points are. Both, literally in terms of the choke point in the strait itself, but also in terms of these super expensive long lead time machines that are needed to do the cryogenics compression for the natural gas. On the nuclear side, there's choke points all through the fuel cycle, especially for production of HALEU for these SMRs. It's a big deal. It's a big problem. For the reactors themselves, turbines is another major choke point, and this is not just for nuclear. This is for turbines for any kind of power plant. So basically, the way that, other than solar and wind, the way that all other power is generated essentially is by boiling water and using steam to turn turbines. That's true for coal plants, it's true for natural gas, and it's true for nuclear. We've just gotten better and better at boiling water and using it to spin turbines, which in turn generates electricity. And So every power plant in the world requires turbines to work, and the lead times for turbines are also about 3 to 5 years. And there's only about four manufacturers globally that make them at scale for the use in power plants. So there's choke points and opportunity all through the power question. Transistors, turbines, nuclear fuel, the reactors themselves. Um, it's a big story. It's a big supply chain story. There are a lot of people working on it. It's a major focus for the federal government, which is why, and we've talked about this before, they convened about 10 months ago a Department of Energy Defense Production Act consortium for the fuel cycle, which covers everything. I mean, from mining, milling, conversion, enrichment, fabrication, deconversion, the utilities, the reactor companies, they're all in this consortium. I'm a member of the consortium, and there is a big push on to solve these logistics problems, the material logistics, but the human logistics too, because for many of these industries, there the human resource is not necessarily there. So there was a spree of building reactors through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then it stopped. Part of that was regulation from the NRC. Part of that was, shifting dynamics with the end of the Cold War. But the reality is, we went from producing multiple reactors on an annual basis. There were constantly reactors in construction, to a place we are today where that's not the case. And so the the specialists that built these things, they're not just around and available anymore. A lot of those guys have aged out. You can't just bring someone off the street and say, "Hey, we're going to have you build and assemble a reactor core now." There's obviously some lead time and education to do that. It's the same thing for building new enrichment plants, for new conversion plants. There's only one conversion plant in the United States. It's Converdyne's facility. I think it was built in the 1960s, and I'm sure they've had overhauls since then, but that's the single choke point for all conversion product in the United States. There is not much in terms of enrichment in the United States. There's not much in terms of yellow cake production in the United States. I think something like 2 million pounds last year, and that actually represents like a quadrupling of production from a few years before. But we consume in the United States 30 million pounds of uranium every year, something in that ballpark. So it's 15 times consumption versus what's actually produced.
So, Connor, there's a lot of people that they look at nuclear very different. I mean, countries aren't just thinking about keeping the lights on, they're thinking about independence, resilience, deterrence, and sadly, right now, more and more leverage. So, where does the fuel supply chain fit into that conversation?
So it's a big part of it. I mean, one of the key advantages of nuclear versus other fuels is the percentage of the energy cost that actually comes from the fuel is quite low with nuclear. Uranium and the enriching process and all that represents about 10% of the cost of running a nuclear power plant. The rest is other pieces. So relative to other fuel sources, it is more economical to do long-term stockpiling of nuclear fuel than it is to stockpile oil, stockpile natural gas. Not just from the perspective of the cost of fuel relative to the overall value of energy it produces, but also it's very dense. So enriched uranium, you don't need a giant facility to store that. To store 100 million barrels of oil, you need massive facilities. To store massive amounts of LNG or natural gas, you need big facilities. And there's a huge Capex element to that for an asset that is just going to sit there and have no yield for a long period of time. So from a strategic perspective, if you have reactors and you can stockpile enriched nuclear fuel, it is a lot easier to do that and have an enduring strategic reserve, 5 years of strategic reserve or more, than it is with fossil fuels, which are not nearly as energy dense.
Listen, let's call it how it is here, though. Through all of that, whoever controls enrichment, whoever controls fuel access, they not just participating in the energy market, they're influencing influencing the balance of power here. And for a long time, I mean, a large part of that chain hasn't been controlled domestically in North America. So how urgent is it to bring that capacity or that capability back on shore?
I would say from a commodities perspective, there are two logistics chains that are absolutely paramount to bring home. One of those is rare earths, and the other is the nuclear fuel cycle. If Russia has a veto through their sole production of 99% of the world's high assay low enriched uranium on the rollout of SMRs in the United States, that is strategically fatal. If China has a veto on rare earths and tungsten and things like that to the United States, that is also fatal. So it's a matter of life and death for global economies, and I think it is a strategic imperative for the United States and North America in general to bring those core commodity supply chains home.
Well, let's push it a little further. What are the risks if that doesn't happen fast enough then?
Well, you wind up in a place where, so let's say that there is no or very limited HALEU production in the United States, and you start deploying these SMRs all over the place, and you're obtaining import waivers for Russian sourced HALEU, and things escalate in Ukraine or at any of the other touch points that Russia has with the West, and all of a sudden the Russians say, well, if you guys want any more of this stuff, if you want to keep powering all your data centers that are now run by TerraPower reactors or Valar Atomics reactors or you name it, that require this material, you're going to make concessions to us. And we've already seen that happen in trade negotiations with China on the rare earth side. So it's not like this is hypothetical. This is something that we've seen, that we know that both China and Russia are willing to play that way with their natural resource and commodity leverage, supply chain leverage. So it's already something that is costing the West. It's already something that we're paying a price for, and it needs to be solved. Fortunately, again, I do think the government is taking it seriously. It's government, so it doesn't move as fast as any of us would like, but it is moving inexorably towards that kind of solution. And I'm involved in that process, and very proud to be involved in that process. But yeah, it's a real life or death problem.
So let me ask you this then. If energy becomes unstable, economies don't just slow down, they break down. And if nuclear supply chains are externally dependent, the risk compounds. So where does American Atomics fit into this shift? Are you building ahead of a national priority that is still forming, or responding maybe to something that is already underway at a much deeper level?
It's already there. It's already an issue that's there right now. If you talk to the SMR companies, they know that they have not figured out the solution on the HALEU side, especially. But across the full fuel cycle, it's a challenge. It's a problem. So we're building for that now. Certainly at the mining and milling side, our core initial projects in Utah and Colorado, but we're looking to add value deeper in the fuel chain through innovative technology, especially at the enrichment phase. We're still early days on that part of it, but yeah, we're working on solving a problem that is very real right now. It's not a tomorrow problem. It's not a future problem. This is an existential issue for the United States today in terms of its fuel cycle, and in turn for its energy supply, especially for the AI category.
Agree more. Okay, let's switch here for a moment. Markets tend to ignore complexity until it shows up as a delay or scarcity, and then it reprices it very quickly. So, where are those pressure points forming today that most people are still not seeing?
So I think that people don't necessarily have a full grasp of the limiters that are stopping new data centers from coming online. The biggest one, it's not chips, it's usually it's on the power side. So people are anticipating, the headline number was something like 600 billion of guidance for Capex on AI and data centers from the Fortune 500 over the next, you know through the beginning of this year and the next 9 months. And that only happens if you can get power for all these reactors. And that only happens if we start bringing new sources of power online. So, we've already seen energy prices in the US go up about 50%. That's a blocker because it creates social opposition. But there are more concrete blockers in terms of things like being able to get large transformers, being able to actually bring on board new power plants, the turbines for those. On the nuclear side, the fuel thing is an issue because they could start doing more of these SMR deployments if there was less of a question mark about where the HALEU is coming from. So right now, the market is pricing in, oh, we're going to do all this Capex. That's going to drive the U.S. economy. It was the number one driver of GDP last year. So if you're not able to build the data centers and that Capex doesn't happen, what does that do to U.S. GDP? Probably not good things. Is that priced in? I would say no. So you have all of these supply chain risks they're not like edge case risks, they're core risks that could materially disrupt the anticipated 600 billion in Capex that is going to go into data centers or allotted to go into data centers over the rest of this year. And if it's not solved, then the AI story looks very different. The total US Capex story looks different. US GDP story looks very different. That has knock-on effects for the election that's going to happen in November. The state of the economy and the market is going to probably could be a decider in that. I think it's going to be a close election. So I think there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily priced in because people don't understand the need for fuel and transformers and turbines and power plants and these things that in a lot of cases, nuclear is new technology, but a lot of these things are old technology and people don't think about them. They don't think about them as part of this sexy AI story, but they're integral to the story. Without them, you don't have the story. So, yeah.
This is a heavy conversation and there's so many different layers to it. And, I to wrap your head around even a portion of it takes a very long time. So let's lighten the mood and the air just a little bit here, Connor. Let's just lighten things up. So, Connor, on every episode of Markets and Leaders, we like to play a fun little game. And today, we're introducing a new game on Markets and Leaders, and you are the first to play it. Okay? This is called Chain Reaction. So here's how it works. I'm going to give you a scenario. You have to tell me the first order effect and then the second order effect. So don't overthink anything, just how this actually plays out in real world or real time, okay? So let's give it a shot and see how it goes. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, the first one. Middle East conflict escalates further and oil spikes aggressively. Tell me what the sequence of events that will happen here.
Okay, so a couple things. In the immediate term, if you get another escalation, it probably results in the Americans hitting the energy infrastructure in Iran. So you're probably going to see the energy infrastructure in the rest of the Gulf get hit. If that happens, and the Chinese aren't able to stop that escalation from happening, because you better believe they're trying to hold the Iranians back from doing that, because it's basically fatal for those guys. You end up with a bifurcated oil and energy market globally. The Americans cut off exports to the rest of the world. Their industry will continue to be able to produce, but Europe and Asia will be they'll not be in a good situation. There's a word I want to use.
It's okay. We're all adults here.
They'll be pretty fucked.
There we go.
If that energy structure gets taken out, you're talking about something like 20% of the world's hydrocarbons being cut off for an extended period of time, and that's a global energy depression. Again, it would be lumpy. It wouldn't be universally distributed, the United States is blessed with an enormous energy endowment, especially hydrocarbons, and it would separate its energy market from the rest of the world. So U.S. industry would still have energy. The rest of the world, a lot of it wouldn't. The Asian Asian industry would be totally screwed. Europe totally screwed. It would produce a global depression. The U.S. economy would do the best of all of the broken ships in that scenario, but it would hurt everybody.
Wow, that's quite the sequence of events. Now, next one, Conor. Western nations fast-track nuclear under national security mandates. How does this play out?
So if you see that happen especially in East Asia and in the United States, you see a couple things. One, you start to see much more build out of large scale reactors. You see the downstream logistics of that become complicated fast. And so things like casting reactor vessels, things like the concrete for the reactor housing, all of those things have to be to reactor grade. It's not like your run-of-the-mill concrete, for example. It's not your run-of-the-mill welding. There's specific nuclear grade requirements for all those things. So the pricing on that starts to get really tight, and you start to see significant upscaling of capacity in all those areas, but it's going to take a few years to bring it online. You start to see the uranium market pricing in increased tightness for its product and as well product all through the fuel cycle. It's not like those reactors can come on tomorrow. I mean, even if you cut regulations to the bone, it's like 4 or 5 years to get a new reactor up. It's not going to be in a situation where it's 1 or 2 years. Further out, when SMRs can get into a position where you can mass manufacture them, could there be 1 year deployments? Yes, but we're not there yet. We're most of these companies are still doing first of kind deployments. Those first of kind deployments would be accelerated, so you'd see a lot more of them. So SMR progress would accelerate, but then again, you accelerate the problem with high assay low enriched uranium. So you start to see a lot more tightness in the uranium market. That starts to send price signals for much more exploration and production. So you probably see junior uranium companies do very, very well, especially if they're located in the United States. You see much more exploration. You see much more production coming online, stuff that, past producing projects that haven't been produced in the US since the 80s, for example, stuff in Africa that hasn't been produced in a long time. Those are some of the bigger knock-on effects. You'll see salaries, anything nuclear related shoot the moon in the same way that software engineering has for years and years, in the same way that certainly anyone with anything AI related has been the case in the last couple of years. You'll probably see a lot more people going into nuclear as a career. So demand for nuclear physics and engineering related college majors probably goes up significantly over time. That's something that takes years. So we're now talking like third and fourth order effects, but that stuff probably happens also.
Okay, so last one. Cole's notes on this one. AI-driven energy demand doubles faster than expected. How does that play out?
Ooh. Lobbyists in Washington start making a lot more money because tech companies are going to be spending every dime they have lobbying to get regulations on new power of every type loosened. At that point, if energy demand doubles from AI, and that happens in, like, let's say you snap your fingers and that occurred, the energy prices in the US would skyrocket. You'd have a revolt against the tech companies. That is a situation where Google actually would be building coal power plants. You're gonna see every lobbyist in DC is going to be lobbying for reduced regulations, for slashed permitting, for new plants to be built every week everywhere in the United States. Like the choke point there is the government. They can build these things, but they need the government largely to get out of the way. And it's not, and again, like we're splitting atoms here. So you do need some level of regulation. You do need to do this safely. But there's a difference between that and the prevailing standard that exists in the United States today, which, there's a number of reasons it evolved that way, but that's a choke point. And so if energy demand doubles, you have to solve it at the government level first. So that means lobbyists start cashing absolutely ungodly checks.
That's the thing. That's the story of our lives, is governments just get in the way. It's like tax pain,
Well, I live in Nassau, so I don't have to worry about the taxes.
Okay, never mind then, Connor. Never mind. All right, let's bring it back to reality, although that might not be far from what we've just been talking about. So when someone is watching all of this unfold, the volatility, the headlines, the narrative shifts, it's very easy to get pulled into all of that chaos. So, Connor, from your vantage point, what actually matters right now?
Well, the number one thing that matters is that we get some sort of resolution in the Middle East so that we can start to build back towards energy normal. But we're never going back to the energy normal that existed prior to this war. Economies, especially in East Asia, that are heavily reliant on hydrocarbons from the Gulf, are never going back to their way of thinking before. Nuclear in the medium to long term is going to become a much more important part of their energy mix. So, like, even before this happened, there were huge tailwinds for nuclear, for the fuel cycle, for the reactor companies. Again, largely driven by AI demand. But now you have this supply and demand, this logistics issue in the rest of the fuel world that is being thrust front and center. And it's risen to the point where it is literally fatal to some of these economies. And if you're the Japanese or you're the Koreans who have democracies, you can withstand some economic pressure. The voters will throw the existing administration out of office, but it won't be an actual bloody revolution in the streets. If you're the Chinese, you have a more rigid system, so you cannot afford to have that kind of economic disruption. A 10% economic drawdown in China because of a war that decimated oil and gas in the Gulf would probably be fatal in a literal sense for some of the people over there.
So what's being overemphasized, you think, that doesn't actually move the needle?
It's being overemphasized. I think there's a couple things. I think that SMRs are going to take a little bit of time to get to full maturity. They're a great business, and I think they're going to be a bigger piece of the energy mix than even what consensus predicts. But I think in the nearer term, it's going to take some time to get those through full production. Where the market will actually start pricing in increased demand from nuclear earlier is on the fuel side, and you're already seeing that. Like if you look at spot uranium, it goes up, it goes down, but if you look month over month over month, the long-term contract prices of uranium, the price that the utilities actually pay to buy uranium, which is the real price, so no one's really transacting at spot. That has gone up month over month, almost without fail, because of one or two exceptions for the last 5 years. So the smartest market, the market that's dictated by the utility companies, is continuing to price in, hey, like supply is tighter and tighter, demand is higher and higher. We're going to see more and more need for this. The SMR side is probably a little bit more hype cycle driven, where you get some substantial moves up, and there's been some players who've benefited from that. But the reality is, most of these companies have not yet done first of kind deployments. Those are coming. They're right around the corner. And on the back of that, you're looking to move to mass production, which is where SMRs really shine over large scale reactors. But yeah, I think that's sort of the mismatch. People are underemphasizing the fuel cycle, where you're actually already seeing positive price signals happening today, and the SMR reactor side, which is a little bit more hype cycle driven and a little bit more detached from the real time scales of the opportunity.
Yeah, that makes sense, and couldn't agree more. Connor, this was such a powerful conversation. I really would like to just buy a ticket to sit on a bench in your mind because it's so full of insights in there for sure. So thank you for coming on and just bringing that clarity to something more important here.
No, I appreciate it. It was a great conversation and happy to do it again. And I enjoyed it.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll have you back soon. Thank you again. And to everyone watching, this is the shift. Energy is no longer background, it is leverage. And in moments like this, markets don't wait for clarity, they move on pressure. Now, remember, these are the opinions of our own with vested possible interest in any or all of the companies we speak about. Always be sure to speak with your licensed financial advisor and know your own risk tolerances. This is not to be used as financial advice. For a copy of our complete disclaimer, head over to appeton.com. The system is tightening. The question is, are you paying attention? This is the Markets and Leaders podcast. I'm Lyndsay Malchuk. Be sure to subscribe to stay in the know of what's next. We'll see you next time.